Whispers beneath the stairwell. The first time I stepped into the house, the air felt wrong. Not cold in the ordinary sense, but stale, as though it had been filtered through wood rot and damp plaster. My breath carried a faint echo in the silence, not because of the size of the hallway, but because sound seemed to cling here, reluctant to leave, unwilling to die. The floor groaned faintly beneath my weight, as though it remembered every step ever taken upon it. The stairwell stood at the heart of the house. It wasn't grand, just a narrow run of dark wooden steps curling upward into shadow, but it drew the eye, demanding attention. Each plank was warped, its varnish blistered and split, like skin left too long in the sun. The banister leaned slightly inward, as though pulled by an unseen hand. I thought at first that it was just another piece of aging architecture. Old houses always have a way of wearing their history in wood and plaster. But here, the weight of that history pressed heavier, lingering at the edges of my perception. Dust seemed to rest thicker beneath the stairs than anywhere else. It clung in heaps, disturbed by no wind, untouched by any passing breeze. Even when I opened the front door behind me, no air stirred into that hollow space. The darkness underneath gaped wider than it should have, deeper than the dimensions allowed. I couldn't stop myself from crouching slightly, from staring into that space as if it expected me. The house was quiet, yet it wasn't silent. The silence had texture. A thin, brittle sound layered itself beneath the stillness, like distant fabric being torn in slow motion. I strained my ears, wondering if it was just the shifting of beams or the settling of foundations. But the noise came too rhythmically, too measured, as though timed with the beat of my own pulse. The smell was worse. At first it was the usual scent of old places: mildew, wet wood, the faint acrid bite of long-extinguished fires. Then from beneath the stairwell rose another note, something metallic, something sharp like iron rubbed against stone. It lingered in the back of my throat, carried on a dampness that felt older than the house itself. I moved closer. The floor groaned in protest, as if warning me away. My hand brushed the wooden banister, and it left a faint residue against my palm, something oily, tacky that refused to dry. I rubbed my fingers together, unsettled by how the stickiness didn't seem like dust at all, but something more organic, like sap or blood dried and re-wetted by time. There, bent at the edge of shadow beneath the lowest step, I swore I heard it. A whisper. Not a voice exactly, but a sigh stretched thin, crawling across the boards. I froze, feeling the air shift against my face, though nothing stirred my hair. The whisper pressed into me, low, deliberate, sliding past my ears and burrowing into the hollow of my chest. The more I listened, the less it resembled sound. It became pressure, vibration, a crawling against the skin, like fingernails tracing slowly across the inside of my ribs. I swallowed hard, though the taste of iron spread deeper into my tongue. It spoke no words I could understand, but the cadence carried intent, the unmistakable suggestion of something trying to be heard. I pulled back instinctively, and the floor beneath me shuddered in complaint. The boards were not just old, they seemed alive, resonant with something buried. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself, but the plaster felt too warm beneath my skin, as though the house had a pulse of its own. Every step I took around the stairwell echoed wrong. The sound didn't bounce outward, it folded inward, funneled into the hollow beneath the steps. My footsteps belonged to that space now, stolen, archived. And from within that hollow, the whispers swelled, faintly overlapping each other, like too many voices speaking through the same throat. The dust swirled when I crouched again. For the first time, I noticed faint markings carved into the underside of the steps. Not words, not symbols, but grooves etched with something sharp, scratched in frenzy rather than design. The wood curled upward in splinters, each gash filled with that same tacky residue, dark against the grain. My hand hesitated inches away, unwilling to touch. The light in the hallway dimmed, though I hadn't seen the sun shift outside. Shadows thickened, collapsing closer toward the stairwell, as though gravity itself favored that void. My chest tightened with the weight of it. The whispers rose again, louder this time, filling the hollowness of the house, until I could almost make out syllables, soft, wet consonants smearing into one another. A draft finally stirred then, but it didn't come from the front door. It pulled upward through the stairwell, dragging dust into the air in delicate spirals. The movement was deliberate, purposeful, as though the hollow space beneath the steps exhaled with patience long denied. The taste of metal grew sharper, joined now by something sour, something rotten at the edges of sweetness. I couldn't breathe properly. Each inhale dragged whispers deeper into me, until I felt them collecting inside my skull, pooling behind my eyes. I pressed my palms to my face, but the pressure only grew stronger, as though the sound wasn't heard by ears but by bone itself. The boards beneath my knees vibrated faintly. The whispering swelled in waves, sometimes faint, sometimes crashing louder than my heartbeat. And then, for a breathless instant, it ceased. Absolute silence pressed down, heavier than any sound, suffocating in its totality. That was when the stairwell groaned. A single deliberate creak, not from my movement, not from settling wood. It sounded like a weight pressing down from above, a footfall descending one step, then another. The shadows lengthened across the hallway floor, though nothing visible moved within them. Each step carried the same oily residue of sound, the wood crying softly as though in pain. My throat locked tight, unable to swallow, my body trembling with the instinct to flee but refusing to move. The last step was taken in silence. Then came the hollow exhale, directly behind me, seeping out from under the stairwell. It pressed against the back of my neck, damp and cold, carrying with it the stench of rust and wet earth. I didn't turn. I couldn't. The whispers returned, pressed directly against my ear, this time with rhythm too human to ignore. Words formed within them, not in language but in sensation, grief, hunger, loneliness sharpened into something cruel. My chest ached with the weight of it, my body swaying under the pressure. And then, slowly, the whispering retreated, folding itself back into the hollow beneath the stairs. The boards sighed in relief, the shadows thinned, the metallic taste receded, though faint traces clung stubbornly to my tongue. I staggered back toward the front door, unable to keep my eyes from that narrow gap of darkness beneath the steps. It no longer looked like a simple shadowed space. It looked open, waiting. The air outside felt raw and sharp when I finally stumbled into it. Yet behind me, even with the door shut tight, I swore I could hear the faintest sigh seeping through the wood. Not every house remembers, but this one did, and it whispered still beneath the stairwell. Durán knows her cry. I had heard about the sanatorium long before I ever saw it. Whispers of its corridors traveled farther than the wind, carried in half-finished sentences and unfinished prayers. People spoke of the place with caution, not because they believed it was haunted, but because the weight of what had happened there had never truly dissipated. Stories cling to certain walls more fiercely than mold, and when I arrived in Costa Rica, I found myself drawn to those very walls. The road leading to Durán Sanatorium climbed steadily upward, winding through hills that seemed to repel habitation. The air thinned with each turn, carrying with it a faint bitterness, the kind of smell that precedes rainfall but never breaks into storm. My shoes crunched against gravel as I made the final approach, and there it was, the shell of the sanatorium, its pale walls stained darker with years of moisture, streaked like tears down its surface. Even from a distance, I could feel the stillness surrounding it, not quiet in the ordinary sense, but a silence that carried weight, as though the land itself avoided making a sound. The wind moved freely through the trees beyond, yet here, the air stalled, thickening into something palpable. The sky hung low above it, overcast but not storming, the light muted in a way that made every edge of the building blur slightly, as though reality itself hesitated to hold it firmly in view. The main hall yawned open, its door long since torn away. Stepping inside was like moving from one world into another. The air smelled of earth soaked through cement, a marriage of rot and rust. The faint tang of medicine clung stubbornly still, buried beneath layers of mold, as though the ghosts of disinfectant lingered. My breath felt damp, swallowed quickly by the darkness pressing forward from the deeper halls. Every step was amplified, my soles knocking against cracked tiles that shifted loosely, their patterns barely visible beneath grime. Faint graffiti trailed along the walls, colors dulled and peeling, the words meaningless against the greater silence. Light filtered through broken windows and slanted shafts, cutting through floating dust that refused to settle. Each ray seemed to illuminate not the space itself, but the weight of abandonment. The staircases twisted upward and downward into shadows. Their railings were rough, splintered by decades of neglect, and touching them left a residue of dust and faint flakes of rust. As I ascended toward the upper level, the boards beneath each step groaned softly, echoing in ways that made it difficult to place their source. Sound bent strangely here, carrying too far or collapsing abruptly into nothing. It was on the second floor where I felt it first, the cry. It did not burst forth suddenly, nor did it echo with clarity. It seeped slowly, threading itself into the silence like water leaking into fabric. At first it was little more than a low hum, indistinct, but undeniably human in its sorrow. The kind of sound that makes the back of your neck prickle before your mind even names it. I froze where I stood, hand resting against the flaking paint of the wall, my breath caught shallow. The cry swelled faintly, stretched thin, a woman's voice elongated beyond comfort. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Its strength was in its persistence, in the way it felt threaded into the very concrete around me. The walls themselves seemed to carry her sorrow. I followed the sound, not by choice but by compulsion. The hall narrowed, windows boarded in places, and the smell grew sharper, metallic, acrid, as though the air itself had been cut open. Doors lined the corridor, many of them ajar, their hinges rusted and weeping orange streaks down the walls. I passed each one slowly, glancing into the rooms where iron-framed beds sat skeletal and broken, mattresses long rotted to nothing. The cry never came from a single room. It bled through them all, too diffused to belong to a throat, too resonant to come from just one place. My heart hammered as I tried to place it, each step convincing me I was closer, only to realize it lingered just beyond reach, always down the next hall, always behind the next door. The deeper I went, the colder the air became. Not fresh cold, but damp, stagnant cold that crawled into my skin and clung there. My fingertips numbed as I traced the cracked walls, and the smell thickened, old blood, soil, something human long decayed. My tongue picked up the bitterness of it, metallic and heavy. When I reached the long ward at the building's far end, the light shifted. Here, the ceiling was half collapsed, open to the gray sky, and beams of natural light cut down sharply. They revealed the hollow emptiness of the ward, the broken bed frames, the rusted chains that dangled loose from the walls. The cry rose here, swelling into a shape almost tangible, stretching across the space until it felt as though I stood within her throat itself. It wasn't just sorrow anymore. It was desperation, a tearing sound, pulled from lungs that no longer drew air. It rose and fell with irregular rhythm, sometimes sharp, sometimes barely audible, but never gone. I pressed my palms against my ears, but it made no difference. The sound wasn't entering me from outside. It was threading its way from within the walls, vibrating through the floor beneath me, resonating through the marrow of my bones. The shadows thickened in the corners of the ward, stretching against the light, their edges jagged and unnatural. Dust swirled upward in erratic currents, disturbed though no wind entered. I staggered closer to one of the beds, drawn by instinct, and saw on the frame faint stains that had soaked deep into the metal, stains too dark to be rust alone. My stomach twisted at the realization. The cry changed again. It grew closer, though I could still see nothing. The air pressed against me, heavy, damp, filled with a taste of iron and wet stone. My chest constricted, my breath shallow and fast. Each exhale fogged faintly, though the air wasn't cold enough to justify it. Then, in the corner of the ward where the shadows pressed deepest, I saw the faintest shift. A form bent forward, not stepping but swaying, as though suspended by the cry itself. Her hair hung in strings, dripping into nothing, her shape blurred and indistinct but unmistakably human. The sound tore from her, louder now, though her mouth was not visible. I tried to step back, but the floor betrayed me, groaning louder than it should, echoing into the cry, feeding it. The sound surged, filling every inch of space, pressing into me until my vision swam. My knees buckled beneath the weight, and I caught myself on the rusted frame of the bed. The metal burned cold against my palm, as though submerged in ice. Her cry fractured into whispers then. Not words, not language I could understand, but fragments of broken intent, phrases that pressed against the edges of comprehension. They were inside me now, vibrating through my teeth, humming against the roots of my skull. My vision blurred, the edges of the ward warping, bending inward as though the building itself leaned closer to hear. I don't remember leaving the ward. One moment I was there, drowning in the sound, and the next I was stumbling through the corridors again, breath shallow, body shaking with each step. The cries followed me, not fading, not growing distant. They clung to me like damp clothes, threading into my skin. When I finally stumbled into the daylight outside, the air felt too thin, too clean. My lungs burned as though they had been starved. Yet behind me, from the broken windows, from the hollow corridors, I heard it still, faint, patient, endless. Durán does not forget. The land does not forget. Her cry remains, woven into its walls, echoing through the marrow of the place, waiting for anyone foolish enough to step inside. And I know now why the locals refuse to speak of it for long. Because when they do, the silence after their words is never empty. It carries her cry. Moonlit bride of forgotten grove, the forest had no welcome. It stood silent at the edge of town, the grove shrouded in a kind of darkness that didn't simply arrive with night. It lingered even during the day, as though the trees themselves absorbed light, refusing to let it pass. Locals avoided it, stepping quickly when their path skirted too near, and when asked, they only muttered about the old cemetery hidden somewhere inside. The grove, they said, was not forgotten by chance. It had been left behind intentionally, abandoned like a grave too heavy to dig again. I went anyway. The path was nearly gone, swallowed by roots and moss. My boots sank into damp soil that smelled of iron and rot, a mix of earth and something more sour, as though time itself had spoiled. Branches above arched unnaturally close together, knitting themselves into a ceiling that shut out the sky. What little light broke through was pale, silvered, a trickle of moonlight already arriving though dusk had barely settled. I felt the grove's breath before I heard it. Cold air pooled against the ground, seeping upward with every step. It wasn't the chill of autumn or the draft of night. It was the chill of absence, of something pulled away and never returned. My arms prickled, the hair along them rising as if stroked by unseen fingers. The trees thickened as I pressed deeper. Their trunks bore scars, long vertical tears as though clawed open by something immense, and within those gashes, the wood gleamed faintly pale. Moss clung to their bases like rotting cloth, damp to the touch when I brushed against it. I caught the smell of stagnant water, though I hadn't seen any yet, the sour reek of algae and stillness. And then I saw the first stone. It jutted crooked from the earth, a grave marker hunched by age, its lettering eroded into illegibility. The surface was rough with lichen, cool even in the absence of direct wind. As I knelt, pressing a hand against it, I realized there were dozens more scattered ahead, half swallowed by roots and soil. Some leaned at impossible angles, others broken outright, their fragments lost in the undergrowth. The grove wasn't just a forest, it was a cemetery forgotten and reclaimed by nature. The air shifted. From between the trees, a pale light shimmered. Not moonlight, not yet. This glow was thicker, more deliberate, like the reflection of water where there was none. It slid between trunks, swaying gently as if carried. My heart slowed in its rhythm, not from calm but from the kind of dread that presses outward, forcing the body to stillness. I followed without knowing why. The grove grew quieter. Even the insects stilled, their nocturnal hum cut short. My boots pressed against soil that grew steadily softer, wetter, until each step gave a muted squelch. Ahead, the glow brightened, and as the trees parted, I found myself standing before an open clearing. The cemetery stretched wide here, stones crowding together like crooked teeth. At its center stood something more recent than the rest, a single iron arch, rusted but still upright, framing the narrow path that led deeper into the graves. The glow pooled there, silvery and thin, as though the arch itself leaked moonlight. That was when I saw her. She stood among the stones, half veiled by mist, her form fragile yet undeniable. A woman in a gown that might once have been white, though here it glowed faintly gray, its fabric trailing through the damp grass without sound. Her head hung low, hair spilling like ink down the front of her shoulders, obscuring her face. Her arms dangled at her sides, limp, yet her posture suggested waiting, an endless vigil within the cemetery's heart. The gown swayed though the air was still. Moonlight spilled fully now as the sky above cracked open between branches. The clearing was drenched in silver, and the figure grew sharper in its glow. The gown shimmered with faint wetness, as if permanently soaked, and its hem bore dark stains where fabric kissed the soil. My chest tightened, though I hadn't moved closer. My breathing rasped too loud against the silence. She shifted. Not a step, not a turn, just a tilt, her head lifting slightly, hair parting enough for me to glimpse pale skin beneath. It glowed like porcelain in the moonlight, but where eyes should have caught the light, there was only shadow, deep and hollow, as though her gaze was an absence rather than a presence. That was when the sound came. Not a cry, not at first. A hum, low, tremulous, like a hymn carried from beneath water. It swelled with each second, the pitch rising into something brittle, sharp, a thread pulled too tight. My bones vibrated faintly with it, my teeth aching as though the sound resonated through them. She lifted her arms. Slowly, impossibly slowly, the fabric dripping from her wrists. And as she did, the hum broke into a wail. It wasn't human. It began as one, anguish thick and raw, but it fractured into tones that bent in every direction, a sound too wide for the clearing. It pressed against my chest, forcing my lungs to contract, dragging tears unbidden from my eyes. It was grief stretched to eternity, sharpened into a blade. The graves around her seemed to respond. Soil shifted, faint tremors disturbing the earth, tilting stones deeper into the ground. Roots bent upward, curling like fingers desperate to escape. The iron arch groaned, its rust flaking as though the cry had corroded it further. She moved forward, not walking, not drifting, simply existing closer than before. Each blink of my eyes betrayed a loss of distance. Her gown dragged across the stones without resistance, her shadow stretching far too long across the ground, reaching the edges of the clearing. I tried to step back, but my legs rooted themselves to the earth. The wail carried weight, a pull against bone and blood alike. It bent the grove inward, pulling every tree, every stone, every breath of air toward her. Her face lifted fully now. The veil of hair fell aside, and the moonlight revealed the ruin of her features. Skin pale yet cracked, lips torn into a rictus neither smile nor scream, and her eyes, two pits of unbroken black, swallowing the moonlight whole, reflecting nothing. The cry tore free again, louder, deeper, shaking the ground. The graves split open, their soil spilling outward, though no bones, no remnants of bodies followed. Only emptiness. Forgotten graves, robbed of memory, robbed of rest. I stumbled at last, breaking whatever spell bound my legs, crashing against one of the stones. My hand scraped raw against its lichen-crusted surface, the sting sharp but grounding. I turned, forcing my steps toward the arch, though each movement dragged as though through water. Behind me, the wail broke again, shattering into echoes that clung to the air like shards of glass. They sliced at my ears, ringing even as I covered them with my hands. The iron arch loomed closer, though it leaned now, its frame trembling under the strain of her cry. I crossed beneath it, and the sound faltered. Not silence, not relief, but a sudden distance, as though the voice remained yet was muffled by unseen walls. The weight on my chest lifted, my legs freed themselves, though my heartbeat thundered with a violence that left me dizzy. When I dared look back, she stood at the edge of the arch, gown fluttering, hair swaying in a wind I could not feel. She did not cross. She simply stood, her hollow gaze fixed upon me, her wail dimmed into a low, endless hum that would not fade. I fled the grove, branches tearing at my arms, roots clawing at my boots. The night seemed to stretch longer than it should, every turn unfamiliar, every shadow leaning too close. When I finally stumbled out into the open fields beyond, the air felt wrong, lighter, yes, but carrying that same faint hum, distant yet persistent. Even now, I hear it sometimes, carried by the moonlight through my window, soft and insistent. A hum that builds, a sorrow that waits. The grove is forgotten, but not by her. She remains, her vigil endless, her cry eternal. And when the moon is full, she waits for someone foolish enough to step beneath its light, to hear her grief, and to never truly leave it behind.